no time for segregating. Let's talk about brown and yellow too. How yellow, yeah.
Peace, dear listeners and viewers. Welcome to Darker Than Blue, the show where we talk about politics for the people who you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say are darker than blue, and our red and brown and yellow brothers and sisters, too. That's all of us, y'all. I am Jackie Lukman, and I'm so glad to be with you on Halloween Friday. Oh, I hope your babies and fur babies are going to be up all night with the sugar that they're going to be collecting today. Y'all know what y'all are in for, a very long night with very hyper children and probably hyper fur children too. Hey, I hope you and your little ones, your middle-sized ones, and even your big ones will have a good night and a safe time tonight. But it is hard for some families across the country to celebrate anything right now as they're on edge, waiting to see if they'll be able to afford any kind of treats, because they don't know if they'll be able to afford food for next month, let alone any kind of treats, literally starting tomorrow, as we know that the Trump administration has threatened to not fund the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, starting tomorrow. Now, they claim, the Trump regime does, that it's the Democrats' fault because they want to give illegal immigrants health care benefits, right? That's the argument. But people who do not have a social security number cannot receive federal benefits in this country, y'all. I hope you know that. But I thought it was just important for me to tell you, since we have to talk about it. It is a part of this. No, so-called illegal immigrants, and again, there's no such thing as an illegal person on stolen land. People are not illegal, and we don't care on this show about your borders, about your residency requirements, because y'all stole this whole thing and you stole people. So, whatever. You call people illegal all you want to, you're illegal. The people who are making up these rules about borders and illegality and this one is a naturalized citizen, no, those were the people who were illegal. But okay, here we are now. So I just want to make it clear for people who are looking at this play out and are confused. People who do not have social security numbers cannot receive federal benefits in this country. And that is a different thing from hospitals being required to treat any and everybody who comes into the emergency room, regardless of residency status. That is what these MAGA folks are lying about when they say that Democrats want to give illegal aliens health care. That is the law, that whoever goes into an emergency room of public hospitals must receive treatment, whether they are citizens, whether they have health insurance or not. That is what Republicans are conflating with Democrats wanting to give illegal immigrants health care. All right. So I just want to make sure we have the facts straight here. And also, let's be clear, this is not a Democrat shutdown, although the Democrats are responsible for partially responsible for why we are at this moment in the political history of this country. But let's be clear about who is in control of things now, because the Republicans control the Senate, the House, and the White House. And they can use the emergency funds that are right there allocated to fund SNAP, or earmarked rather to fund SNAP, in the event of something like this happening, so that people do not go hungry because of political appendage measuring. And this is actually a law. It is the law that the federal government, regardless of who is at the titular head of the federal government, must use the emergency funds to continue to fund the SNAP program. That is the law. But this regime is like, nope, they refuse to use the emergency funds, and they want people to go hungry. But several judges have ordered the administration, the regime, I have to keep calling it what it is. Several judges have ordered the regime to distribute the SNAP contingency money immediately. And one judge in particular has ruled that the suspension of SNAP funding is unlawful because, just said, it is the law that the contingency fund that is earmarked for SNAP funding for emergencies be used to fund SNAP in emergencies. So ABC News has reported that a federal judge in Rhode Island has temporarily ordered the Trump regime to continue funding benefits for SNAP, the federally funded Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The judge says, quote, "The court is orally at this time ordering that USDA must distribute the contingency money timely or as soon as possible for the November 1 payments to be made." This was what the U.S. Judge John J. McConnell Jr. said of the Trump regime's refusing to fund the SNAP program. After an hour-long emergency hearing, Judge McConnell ruled that the suspension of SNAP funding is arbitrary and likely to cause irreparable harm, citing the terror felt by Americans who are scrambling to meet their basic nutritional needs. As SNAP cuts loom, there are food assistance resources that exist that help to fight food insecurity, but you and I, folks, we know those resources are not enough because some of those resources are also funded by the federal government and the state governments that get their money from the federal government. So this ruling came as a federal judge in Boston in a separate case ruled that the Trump regime's attempt to suspend SNAP funding is unlawful, but declined to immediately order that the program be funded. So then U.S. District Judge Indira Talwani reserved judgment about whether to issue a temporary restraining order. Why bother issuing a ruling if you're not going to make people do what the ruling says them to do? But okay, she instead asked the Trump regime to advise the court whether they would authorize reduced SNAP benefits for nobody. How are you a judge and you're going to ask the person that you just ruled against, are you going to do what I said for you to do? Oh my gosh, we are a mess in this country. So we'll have to see if the Trump regime will obey the orders from these judges. I don't think they will. I hope I'm wrong. I do. I absolutely hope I'm wrong. But you know who doesn't hope they fund SNAP? You know who wants those SNAP benefits to end and who wants to see poor people go hungry? White Christians who make up Trump's MAGA base. Yes, the people you see on your social media pages celebrating the end of SNAP benefits, making jokes about poor people going hungry, condemning poor people who need food assistance as lazy, people celebrating taking food away from people to make them work harder. That's exactly the kind of Christianity that's running the country today. And this is what these people voted for because this is what their faith leads them to believe. This is the true faith of white Christian nationalism, and it always has been. The people who voted for Trump knew that this would be something he would do, and they voted for it because they want it done. And they believe that this is the correct action to take food benefits from poor people according to their sick, twisted, racist, religious perspective that is very deeply informed not by what is actually in the Bible, because they don't read the Bible, y'all. I keep telling you that, and I really do mean a lot of us Christians, regardless of what denomination we are operating in, a lot of us don't read that book. We don't. So we believe a lot of lies about what people say is in that book, and white Christian nationalists do the same thing. They listened to televangelists and prosperity gospel preachers and these pulpit pimps telling them what is in the Bible. And what these people say is in there is actually not, but they're rich. You see, the people who are telling white Christians this stuff. So, of course, they're right. Their followers believe anyway, because they have been deeply conditioned to trust and never challenge anything that rich white people tell them to do. And that conditioning has come with a healthy dose of the fear of death and hell if they don't comply. But it's also undergirded with a healthy dose of racism, sexism, xenophobia, homo and transphobia, and ableism that they believe that is also conditioned by that twisted faith that they have. And I've been wanting to hit on this for a minute. So I hope you indulge me just a bit, because it is absolutely relevant to everything we are facing now. Because much of this hell that's unfolding in full is based on this ideology of the prosperity gospel, the Protestant work ethic, and this thing that has come out of it that I'm calling the theology of greed for God is good, because that's what it looks like, right? So, what we see now in this prosperity gospel is the corrupting influence of capitalism on Christianity. It's the juxtaposition of the bootstrap mentality of capitalism, which says that anyone in a capitalist society can be successful if they just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, if they just work hard, not rely on anyone else for help, make sacrifices, and their effort will be rewarded with financial and material success rather. With Christianity, that this has produced this alternative spirituality, the melding of these two ideologies, this Christian prosperity gospel and this Protestant work ethic craziness, that has produced this prosperity gospel idea where faith is a financial transaction. And this rests on the belief that wealth is a reflection of God's favor. And these people use verses like Malachi 3:10 that are misused to claim that pastors can demand large donations from their congregants in exchange for blessings, right? So it's literally a transaction they've turned faith into. And adherents of this ideology also preach that poverty is the result of weak faith. And some of this belief comes from a sect or a denomination of Christianity called Calvinism. And Calvinism is a branch of Protestantism. Protestantism is basically any Christian denomination that's not Catholic. And Calvinism is based on the teachings of a guy named John Calvin. And his teachings emphasize the sovereignty of God, the authority of Scripture, and that's pretty common to most, if not all, Christian denominations, since they all basically believe those two things, right? But Calvinists differ from other Protestant denominations in a few ways, but the most important for this discussion is their belief in predestination, meaning they believe that God has already chosen who will be saved and who will not be saved before people are even born. Now, I know this doesn't make any sense, and it's also not in the Bible, but this is important to understand as a part of this belief, because this actually led to a lot of anxiety among Calvinists about how would anybody know if they were among the elect, or if they were the ones that were predetermined to be saved or not. They had no way of knowing. So over time, what Calvinists did was to begin to believe that financial and professional success was the sign of God's favor that let them know that they were among the elect or the predestined of God. I'm not kidding. This is where it comes from. And this was made possible by associating the job or profession that one had with one's spiritual calling or God-given vocation, right? Which was easier to do in the 19th century when available jobs were minimal and marketable skills were pretty much linked to manual labor. And so this belief transformed the idea of hard work being necessary to survive, that everybody had to, everybody that wasn't like royalty, right? And the landowner, that everybody had to work hard to survive. That idea was transformed under Calvinism to hard work being key to one's duty as a Christian, right? And if hard work becomes a required aspect of Christian faith, a specific required aspect of Christian faithfulness, then how successful you are at that work easily becomes an indication of whether God favors you or not. When someone who believes that their work is both directed and ordained by and a vital service to God, and they become wealthy from that work, then they believe that the wealth is God's way of showing his favor for that hard work and for them. I know, y'all, it's silly. And when all they had to do really was not believe that God chooses who he's going to save and who he's not going to save before they're born, because again, that is not actually in the Bible. But this is how Calvinists dealt with this anxiety that they created about their own salvation. As crazy as that is, as crazy as that sounds, Calvinists also put a little bit of a twist on this idea of financial and professional success in order to make it not, I guess, seem so gross, right? So what they said was that in work being the evidence of God's blessing, what they said was that when God blesses your work with material wealth, you can't use that material wealth on your own personal luxury. That was their caveat, that you had to take the wealth that you earned or the wealth that God blessed you with from your work. You had to take that wealth and not buy designer clothes and a bigger house and a bigger, horse-drawn carriage or whatever, but you had to take that wealth and you had to reinvest it in the business that God blessed you with that wealth through. That was the caveat they created to sort of try to stay within the confines of biblical mandates on not pursuing and hoarding wealth. Okay, so once again, a bunch of Christians decide we're going to make something up that's not in the book. And in order to keep us from being on the wrong side of God with the thing we made up that's not in the book, we're going to add this caveat that should make it okay, but it doesn't. All right. So instead, it was supposed to be, like I said, this money, this wealth, this blessing, financial blessing from God reinvested back into the business, where God's financial blessings would be used to create, guess what? More of God's financial blessings. But really, this is just a spiritual spin on capitalist wealth accumulation, where work equals profit equals reinvestment of profit equals growth of business equals more work equals more profit equals bigger and more and greater blessings from God. All right. So while this Protestant work ethic is based in Calvinism, and it includes the eschewing of adorning oneself with the high-end flashy luxuries that the prophets, they attributed to God's blessings and soberly reinvest them to accumulate more of that profit instead, that doesn't make this belief spiritually or scripturally sound. It is not. First, obviously, because working hard is not something that's limited or unique to Christians, Protestants, Calvinists, or white people for that matter. Millions, if not billions of people all over the world do and have always worked their fingers to the bone and have never, ever gotten rich. In fact, we know that most of the people who work manual labor, low-wage, seasonal jobs in particular, but the vast majority of all workers all over the world, not only never get rich, but most of those people barely make enough money to sustain their own lives on their meager wages, let alone make enough off of their arduous, endless, often monotonous labor to make them rich. And that was true in the past. And as capitalism has expanded and evolved into the dictatorship of finance capital that it is today, it's even more true now. At the foundation of this belief, though, is the transformation of the biblical admonition against pursuing and hoarding wealth into the pursuit and accumulation of wealth being a good thing, as they say it's a sign of Christian virtue. Through this belief, rich people are venerated as more holy, more moral, more virtuous than other Christians and other non Christians alike, because they must have worked harder than anybody else, because God rewards people who pull themselves up by their bootstraps with wealth, right? I know that sounds crazy, but this is what these folks believe. And this narrative that anyone who is poor can rise from that condition through nothing but individual, God-focused hard work, diligence, discipline, and thrift, well, that supports the capitalist idea of a self-made man, which glorifies individual effort and centers it as the key determinant, the only determinant to financial success. You see how that works? Seamless integration of lies, ain't it? But for a lot of people, this actually sounds like common sense. I'm not crazy. I know some of you are listening and watching and saying, well, yeah, you should reap the benefits of your hard work. And that's how it should go, right? You should work hard. You should earn everything you have so that you can enjoy it. I know some of y'all are saying that. Except, folks, this belief ignores systemic issues like exploitation, wage theft, racism, sexism, xenophobia, ableism, ageism, all the things that are very real roadblocks to most people's hard work being compensated as well as others, or even equally or fairly at all. So, in that way, this belief, this prosperity gospel, Protestant work ethic belief, also justifies the inequality that these systemic issues create by arguing that if wealth is a sign of God's blessing, then poverty must be a sign of God's disfavor. So systemic issues like racism disappear, and Black poverty and inequality become personal, moral failings of Black people. Our failure to work hard, our desire to only want handouts for nothing. We're all lazy. This is where the spiritual belief for these ideas come from. And it's their way of saying we're sinful and cursed by God. It's an extension of the curse of Ham almost, which is also not in the book. But this is how they ignore that the problem is in the capitalist system itself. And this is how these beliefs are designed to keep us marginalized. And this is where the hatred of the poor emanates in so many Christian hearts and minds, because they believe that it's their laziness, immorality, or repeated bad decisions that have displeased God, who's punishing them by withholding wealth from them and making them suffer because they deserve it, you see. That really is what these folks believe. This belief makes it almost impossible for those who adhere to this prosperity gospel, Protestant work ethic stuff, who to pay any attention to systemic issues. It makes it impossible for them to question the low wages paid to workers, to question the lack of benefits or worker protections provided for workers. It makes it hard for them to question or care about the unsafe working conditions and lack of any social safety net for people who are not rich, because they really do believe those people deserve their lot, since their poverty is an indication that God is angry with them, rather than those people are poor because they are being taken advantage of by the rich. So this is what leads people to hate workers and the poor, to have little to no sympathy for them when they demand better pay and working conditions, more paid time off to be with their families, health insurance, better living conditions, etc. Now, on the other hand, Christians who believe this see all wealthy people as virtuous. the most virtuous among all in society. And they believe this because, again, they think that wealth is a signal from God, that they are more righteous than others. So any demand from the working class and poor of the wealthy to release some of that wealth so the working class and poor can live less oppressive lives is always met by Christians, not by the Christian leadership, by many Christians, with dismissal, rebuking, cruelty, or worse, the legislation that we're seeing now from Christians who believe this. And although this Protestant work ethic, prosperity, gospel stuff is not an inherent or even intentional part of capitalism, the intertwining of this spiritual ideology into the development of capitalism, especially in the US, has resulted in this ideology behind and the impact of the prosperity gospel. This merger of this Calvinist ideology with capitalism teaches that financial well-being and physical well-being, because that's where this word of faith, name it, claim it, belief it also comes from. These things, they see these things as the will of God, and that faith, positive speech. This is why you're running around with a bunch of Christians talk about, oh, that's too negative. I don't watch the news. That's too much negativity. I don't like to focus on negative things. This is where this comes from. That these people believe that faith, positive speech, and donations to religious causes, not social causes, will increase one's material wealth. And the religious cause is always the church. And this ultimately puts spiritual approval on the pursuit of wealth for personal consumption, provides a religious justification for capitalist exploitation, as wealth, again, they believe, is a sign of God's favor without any consideration for how that wealth is accumulated, and it cruelly blames the poor and sick for their own condition, suggesting they lack sufficient faith, which means ultimately that the wealthy have no obligation to do anything to help those lazy, sinful poor people who won't just pull themselves up by their bootstraps to be rich like us. To hell with them. Quite literally, that's literally what these folks believe. Only in the prosperity gospel preacher's case, they're rich because their church members are giving the pastor their money that the people in the pews work hard for. Those preachers aren't doing any real hard work to earn that money, unless you consider lying on God and the Bible hard work. And at this point, they've done it so long, it's not even hard work anymore. It is those people who convince the rest of Christendom not to challenge rich people outside of the church regarding their practices for how they treat their employees, because this ideology is applied to all of society, not just the church. This ideology ends up placing the entire moral burden on the worker, which is always used by owners to make excessive and oppressive demands of workers. But here's the really messed up part of this already messed up ideology. It is also very frequently accepted by many workers who are themselves Christians. The idea that God rewards hard work with wealth and health and rewards positivity with good health becomes the excuse for accepting low wages, long hours, no time off, no holidays off, no work-life balance, and no complaining about any of the horrible ways that you are mistreated at work. When the worker is told to be grateful for the opportunity to work and prove their virtue, many workers agree with this and believe that submitting to the exploitation with a good, positive, faithful, God-focused attitude is a sign of their faithfulness to God. Now, we're going to get into a little bit more of this, but it's 30 minutes past the hour and it is time for a station break. So, engineer extraordinaire, what is on tap for the people today?
D'Angelo is loved not only for his own music, but also for being one of the chief architects of neo soul. His 1995 album, Brown Sugar, helped to define what neo soul would become. On Saturday, November 1st, 7 a.m. until midnight, WPFW presents Brown Sugar, the genius of D'Angelo and the explosion of neo soul, celebrating his unique style and innovative approach to black music, as well as neo soul, a sound both retro and futuristic. Programmers James Funk and Captain Fly, DJ Lance Reynolds, Jasonic, The Culture Shack and Soul Conversations crews, and Decipher's Ill Street Grooves come together in this special day of fundraising to explore D'Angelo's music, artists that influenced him and the genre, and the global neo-soul landscape that defined a generation. That's Brown Sugar, the genius of D'Angelo and the explosion of neo-soul. November 1st on WPFW, building a better world, one broadcast at a time.
Thank you so much, and absolutely will miss the incredible talent of D'Angelo. Just an amazing old soul, definitely church focused, rooted in the entire experience of blackness, and just the depth of his talent will be so missed. And I'm appreciative of the efforts that WPFW does to connect culture and struggle. It's absolutely a beautiful thing. But let's struggle through the rest of this ridiculous ideology, because y'all, we are absolutely, whether you know it or not, and I know people don't want to believe it, but it's true, we are living in a theocracy right now. The people who Donald Trump doesn't have to actually be a Christian in order for this sick, twisted, evil, capitalist focused misinterpretation and blatant lies about scripture, the Bible, God, and Jesus to be in control of this country right now, because they are, and they actually have been for quite some time. And so let's get back to the workers believing this, because this is where the issue, I think, really is. Nobody wants to be considered lazy or interfering with the move of God or the Holy Spirit or God's divine will, not even in the workplace, right? Among Christians, among those of us who are believers. Too many Christian workers, because of this ideology, and because of the shaming of working class and poor people, too many Christian workers are just as opposed to labor rights as their bosses are. These workers will frequently not ask for a raise, not ask for more time off, not ask for promotion, not complain about dangerous working conditions. They won't unionize. Instead, they will submit willingly to the abuse, believing that this is their way of proving their worth of the blessing of wealth. They want it, so they think they have to work for it. But when the hard work of the workers, the hard work of the poor, does not result in the alleged guaranteed wealth that this Protestant work ethic, prosperity, gospel exhorters, preachers, pulpit pimps sell, all these people get is exhaustion, health problems they cannot afford to resolve, because the same people who are telling them they have to work to work hard for God to bless them with wealth are the same people saying, we're not giving you health care either, because you don't deserve that. All they get are exhaustion, health problems they can't afford to resolve, and continued, persistent, deeper, entrenched poverty. And then they get the police when they decide, you know what, I'm sick of this, I'm going to stand up against this. That's when the police come in. Those people are shamed as lazy and undeserving of God's blessings, as evidenced by their poverty, by the very people who are stealing their wages. And many Americans who consider themselves Christians feel ashamed of themselves because of their poverty, because they've internalized these narratives that God blesses the hard work of the faithful with wealth. So they're not wealthy, so they must not be sufficiently faithful to God. So they just put their head down and try to be more faithful. in whatever way the people who are exploiting them and stealing from them tell them they have to show their worth. This is why so many working class and poor Americans talk about how they work so hard and should be in a better position in society than they are, but they also don't want to demand anything of the rich or even of the government that absolutely employs the same exploitative logic as this prosperity gospel, Protestant work ethic ideology. They only do it from the political standpoint. But the faith leaders of these working class and poor Christians and their perpetuation of these ungodly ideologies have convinced millions of American workers to shut up and take it in the name of the Lord. Now, to be absolutely clear, the Bible does not condone any of this, none of it. Yes, there are scriptures in the Bible that talk about workers being honest, obedient, and hardworking. But those scriptures do not justify employers or the rich exploiting workers, stealing their wages, denying them benefits or health care if they're not. In fact, the scriptures people really hate that talk about slaves and masters, they're really about bosses and workers, aren't they? Because aside from the practice of servitude in ancient contexts being completely different from what we know as chattel slavery, so those scriptures do not condone the practice of slavery simply because people in ancient societies in which chattel slavery did not exist had servants whose period of servitude was either to pay off a debt as punishment for some type of offense or because they were captured in war. That's what those scriptures reflect. But instead, those scriptures also can reflect the employer-employee relationship. When we read these scriptures in that modern context, those same scriptures tell employees to do their jobs faithfully and well, yes, but they also tell the bosses to pay their workers fairly and promptly, because delaying or withholding wages from a worker is considered a serious sin because it's equivalent to theft. It's in the Bible that justice must be paid attention to over profit. Building wealth by exploiting workers is condemned by God in many, many places in the Bible. That employers, that bosses, that the rich have to recognize the shared humanity of everybody else with them. Employers and employees are equal worth and equal dignity because they are made by the same God. And one of them being rich and a boss does not make them better or have any a special or unique power or authority over the employee or the poor. And bosses, employers must provide rest and dignity. Work should not be dehumanizing. Workers deserve rest and just treatment, not just a paycheck. All of that is in the book. But because, like I said at the beginning, y'all, we don't read our Bible. We spend all that time getting up early on a Sunday morning or a Saturday, depending on which denomination you are. Getting up early, putting on your Sunday or your Saturday or your Sabbath best, putting on the makeup and the perfume and the cologne and going all the way to the building. And you sit there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours, and you listen to these people tell you what's in the book. You have the book. You open the book to where they tell you to open the book. But when you go home, you don't read. You don't read to check to see that what they said is true. That the way they explained what they said is in there is actually reflective of what it actually means. We don't do that. So these people have been able to lie to us all this time. And this is what led me to dig deeper into my own faith. I found out how much these people were lying. And then there is this other thing. That the Bible makes clear about the relationship between employer and employee, the rich and the poor. And that is that God is the ultimate judge. God hears the cries of the exploited workers and holds their employers accountable in the book. So even though the Bible says of Jesus that he is in solidarity with the poor, that's in Luke 6:20, prosperity gospel preachers, and truthfully, to be honest, even traditional evangelical Christians who don't adhere to prosperity gospel, they've also employed this Calvinist, this twisting of Calvinist ideology to condition workers and the poor to never challenge authority and never question rich people and their actions. But this ideology goes beyond influencing how individual Christians behave in the face of capitalist exploitation. This ideology also contributes to Christian oppression, or Christian opposition, rather, to welfare, which is what we're seeing with the way people are responding to SNAP benefits possibly ending in this country. The idea that welfare in any form is seen as giving money to people who God has clearly judged lazy and undeserving of financial blessing by making them poor leads people to believe that they don't deserve any help until they prove they want to work hard. Yes, I know. Absolutely counter to everything that Jesus is about. But this is what people have come to believe, not because it's actually in the book, but because this is what's really in their heart. This is what people really think about people who are not like them. This is the basis of work requirements for welfare programs. Remember where that came from? It wasn't the GOP. It wasn't Donald Trump. It was Bill Clinton in 1996 with the revamping of welfare. What did he say? He said he ended welfare as we know it. Work requirements were a major part of Bill Clinton's revamping of welfare in 1996. This ideology is the foundation for cutting funding for food aid, defunding food pantries, limiting free school lunch programs, and even restricting what people can purchase if they do receive food aid. The idea that poor people who receive SNAP should not be able to buy fun things like soda, candy, cake, steak, or even hot prepared food stems from this stingy and hateful attitude toward the poor that this prosperity gospel, Protestant work ethic, capitalist fusion informs. Only people who work hard should be able to enjoy nice things like cake for their kids or a steak every once in a while. They've earned it, these people believe, because they worked hard, and the result of their hard work is that they can afford to have these things. And because they can afford to have these things, then they deserve them. That is the thinking. Now, none of these people feel bad at all that they are saying poor people do not deserve to eat anything other than the dirt their laziness has afforded them, because they don't believe that poverty is anything other than a personal moral failing that should not be rewarded with assistance. This is also not an isolated misinterpretation of scripture or an accidental byproduct of a few, crazy apostates making trouble. Rather, this ideological manipulation of scripture and just flat out lies to favor wealth and power without question is made possible because in the modern era, at least, the megachurch industrial complex has been key to the spread of this thinking, particularly through prosperity gospel and word of faith teaching. These megachurches that operate like corporations, they prioritize growth and expansion, branding and revenue over fidelity to the gospel of Jesus Christ, over biblical substance, over the truth of the spirit of the scriptures, over Christian and basic human relationship and community. Worship in these institutions are entertainment, meant to draw large numbers to fill the coffers through featuring concert-style praise and worship, flashy light shows. Some of them even have smoke machines, star-level musical acts, and even celebrity pastors. There's not supposed to be such a thing. The most dangerous aspect of this phenomenon, however, I think, is the influence they are able to wield in the political arena at every level in this country, from lobbying against taxes for their churches at the local level to keeping, to keep their megachurch buildings tax-free, regardless of all the side businesses and the LLCs they prop up, to have more nets to drag more money into their pockets through, to hosting politicians to speak as guests in their pulpits, or raising up members of their own congregations to run for political office. And as these institutions focus on changing the culture for Jesus, because that's what they say, in ways that Jesus never actually told us to, by influencing legislation that penalizes the poor, criminalizes homelessness, denies women the right to control their bodies, discriminates against sexual, gender, non-conforming people, upholds discriminatory policies, and supports the suppression of dissent and free speech, they simultaneously focus their internal messaging on personal salvation and the pursuit of individual enrichment in God's name, while saying nothing about justice for the oppressed, that those policies brutalize even further and create more of, that God actually has a lot to say about. He hates it. He says it repeatedly in the Bible. It's in there. Unless, of course, the oppressed are fetuses or white men or the rich. Then, they're like, yeah, we need to save them. Anybody else? They're not oppressed. They're just lazy. This is the cornerstone of the white Christian nationalist movement in the United States, where free market capitalism is framed as biblical. It is. Capitalism in this country, when capitalism in this country is basically the religion. Capitalism in America is Christianity. Christianity in America is capitalism. So socialism and communism are demonized as un-American or just plain evil, where Jesus is turned into a supply side savior who favors the makers over the takers. And these folks believe Jesus is for the makers. So the denial of any support for the takers is seen as a divine will of God to push people to work harder, although the ruling class knows that those people will never get rich because they're the ones stealing the workers' money, and certainly never as rich as they are. And it's all part and parcel of white Christian nationalist belief. Horrifyingly, though, this idolatrous ideology is not limited to the confines of the US, because just as capitalism has influenced Christianity in ways that we just enumerated, imperialism's influence on Christianity turns this idolatry outward to the rest of the world with blood-soaked results. It's important to connect the false doctrine that undergirds what we're living through here, that mandate with others like it, like, manifest destiny and colonialism, settler colonialism. It's important to understand that they're all connected and they all come from the same scriptural manipulation and lies and white supremacist greed produced. And it produced the long blood-soaked history of Christian hypocrisy that we contend with today. Excuse me. The 19th century European expansion was justified as God's will, erasing indigenous and Mexican communities at the same time that African and indigenous communities were ravaged for human resources, I mean that literally, to be fed into the slave trade for capitalist profit of European nations. Through the doctrine of discovery and related papal edicts, invasion was masqueraded as exploration. Land theft, mass slaughter and rape, genocide, enslavement, resource theft, colonization were legitimized as divine plans for the faithful, or rewards for the faithful, and punishment for the barbarians or savages who were not Christians. This is connected to missionary imperialism, where indigenous peoples were converted to a foreign faith, Christianity, at the point of a sword, rifle, cannon, under the threat of death. And it facilitated the destruction and attempt at complete erasure of indigenous social, cultural, spiritual traditions, practices, and beliefs. A practice we now call cultural genocide that used mechanisms like forcibly sending indigenous children to residential boarding schools and banning native languages and songs of enslaved and colonized people and the like. This is not a far cry from the beliefs within the Protestant work ethic that relegated people who were not rich to being poor because they were lazy and thus not blessed by God. Although in the original belief, mass murder was not a solution for the poor. The Calvinists weren't that crazy. They just said, work harder to prove yourselves worthy of the blessing. Capitalism took it farther. White supremacy took it farther. Capitalist greed and racist hatred pushed the boundaries toward the elimination of unworthy people through weaponizing an us versus them dichotomy, wherein the them were considered savages, barbarians, mongrels, vermin, or whatever disparaging term was needed to render entire peoples worthy of only servitude or death because they did not adhere to that particular brand of Christian faith. And if you think that wasn't bad enough, consider that the Cold War is even connected to this evangelical deification of capitalism by framing it as a Christian concept, capitalism, that is, or the preferred economic system for God, as if God needs an economic system. But they believe this. So this obviously puts communism and socialism on the opposite end of that spectrum. This virulent hatred of communism in the US, this unhinged hatred of socialism in this country and much of the West, it's not due to any actual crimes that communists and socialists have committed. It's the result of the adoption of capitalism as approved and even ordained by the white nationalist Christian God, which positions communism and socialism on the opposite of it, rendering it atheistic and evil. The acceptance of this idea is reflected in the support of US foreign policy against socialist and communist countries and leaders, expressed by those considered giants in the evangelical Christian world. This has been going on for a much longer time than we realize, this Christian demonization of socialism and communism, because Billy Graham, did y'all ever watch those crusades of his? You know, the ones that he had in the big football stadiums? He used a lot of those crusades to crusade against communism and socialism. So this also extends to the demonization of not just communism and socialism, but of liberation theology also. Because the framing of liberation theology as Marxist inspired delegitimizes it in the minds of many Christians because of this belief that capitalism is a Christian economic system, while godless anti-American atheists are communist, socialist, Marxists, Leninists. Woo. So I know we are up against what seems to be an insurmountable wall of terror and oppression and fascism right now. But I hope you can see that the reason, or one of the reasons, I think people are not flooding the streets, rising up the way we're seeing people in other countries are, even other capitalist countries. I believe this twisting of the Christian faith, this bastardization of the Christian faith, this vile, evil, white supremacist, settler colonial, pan-European, imperialist, disgusting, vile, I said that already, it's so vile I have to say it twice, lie about the Christian faith is the reason that we're not seeing people in the streets yet. I think maybe some of these folks are going to have to feel a little bit extra pain for them to at least begin to question some of this belief. And I think some of those people will be pushed to abandon this belief. But I do think that in order for more of the folks who are deeply entrenched into this prosperity gospel, word of faith, Protestant work ethic, greed is good for God kind of ideology, we're not going to be able to convince these people that they're wrong and they need to turn away from this and actually open the book and read it to see what God says about all of this. There's a lot that's in there that condemns all of this. But it is other Christians. And specifically, it is going to have to be white Christians who get into these mega churches and read their brethren and sistren the riot act that is literally right in the book. This is what we're facing. This is what we have to organize around. And when people leave this ideology, this is what we're going to have to help them heal from. So we're out of time. I am hoping that the SNAP benefits do get loaded onto the EBT cards and the people can eat and the kids get to enjoy their Halloween. I hope you do. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. Luta continua, the struggle continues. But if we keep focusing on the truth and talking about it, putting it out there so we know what we're fighting, Victoria Acerta, victory is certain. Peace, everybody. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Let me remove that one. I think wait a minute. What am I doing? Nope. I don't know. Here we go. All right. There we go. Thank you all so much. I thought I was going to have another show today. I was hoping to get someone on to talk about Sudan, but I wasn't able to because they were very busy. So I'm hoping I will have them on next week. I want to tell you that what you just heard, what I just conveyed to you, is a section of my forthcoming book. I can't believe I'm saying that. Oh my God. I just read to you a section of my forthcoming book, that I believe will be published in spring of next year. It is a book that is focused on the fact that we need more John Brown Christians. So that is why that little section, that wasn't even the whole chapter, that's why that little section was very focused on a specific misinterpretation from a specific denomination of Protestantism, and that is Calvinism, because John Brown was a Calvinist. The interesting thing is, and this is also a part of the chapter, John Brown did the exact opposite of what was done to the Calvinist ideology that we just talked about. Because if you read the history of John Brown, and there are several books written about John Brown that are really excellent. There's one that I'm referencing heavily from an author named Louis DeCaro. And I actually, let me share it. I do have it up. So I'm going to share the screen shot with you after I close this Zoom, because it's eating up all my computer resources. There we go. Let me share the book cover and title with you. This is a book that I'm using as a reference. This one is not my book. I have seen the cover art and the title for my book, and oh my God, my emotions today have been all over the place. I just, because they sent me the cover art and today for the book, and I'm so excited, but I'm so very, very nervous. But this is one of the books that I'm referencing heavily to talk about John Brown in this context of the bullshit people have made up about what's in the Bible in relation to work and workers and poverty and all that kind of stuff. This is written by a guy named Louis DeCaro. In this book, John Brown, The Cost of Freedom, selections from his life and letters, really, really great, because this book focuses on something that I did not know. Excuse me. And I'm going to drop this in the chat for you so you can, and yes, is this Amazon? No, it's not. This is, the publisher is International Publishers. I try to stay away from Amazon as much as possible. So this book talks about something about John Brown that I had no idea about, and that is that John was an entrepreneur. He was a serial entrepreneur, as many people were back then, because there weren't like jobs that people applied for. But John Brown was engaged in an enterprise that was basically, it was he was a broker for sheep farmers, who would sheep herders rather, who would sell the wool to textile manufacturers. And John and his family, staunch, devout Calvinists. That's why they opposed slavery the way they did. And it wasn't just John Brown who hated slavery. His father, Owen Brown, hated slavery. His father, Owen Brown, also wrote has a memoir, wrote his memoir, and wrote in his memoirs that not only did he hate slavery, but he believed in full equality in society of Black and white and indigenous people. Even though the Browns were settlers, even they realized, you know what? Okay, this genocide thing was evil. It was done. We didn't have anything to do with it. We're not going to mistreat the indigenous people who are still on their land. They are our brothers and sisters. And damn it, slavery? What the hell? No, that's got to go too. Right? So Owen Brown writes in his memoir, Owen Brown is John Brown's father, staunch, devout Calvinist, writes in his memoir, all men are created equal in the eyes of God. So I want to live in a society in which all men are created equal the way God said it is, right? So John Brown comes along and he's raised up in this Calvinist tradition. And yes, there is this Protestant work ethic. You have to work hard. The work of your hands is good labor and it's honorable in the eyes of the Lord and all this kind of stuff. But what they don't do is say that if you're poor, you're sinful. That's not where the Browns go with that, particularly John Brown, because what he does in his professional life is to do everything he can to work with oppressed people. He makes sure, he literally goes out of his way to work with Black people. He goes out of his way to live in community with Black people. John Brown spent most of his life attending Black churches. That's how committed he was. And he lived in, a lot of times he tried to, if he couldn't find a place to settle his family that was near Black people, he tried to stay in Calvinist abolitionist communities. And then there were usually surrounded, or there were indigenous communities near them. And very often, some of the Calvinists were, even though they didn't like slavery, they also didn't really like Black people or indigenous people. The Browns were actually not like that. The Browns, I think there's a story in one of these books. I can't remember if it's Frederick Douglass's book, because Frederick Douglass also wrote an autobiography of John Brown that is excellent, that I reference also. But in one of these books, there's a story that's retold about Brown where some of his Calvinist abolitionist neighbors they don't like the indigenous, and they know that the indigenous, the survivors of the indigenous genocide, had to trade with them things that they couldn't do, like hunt, to survive. And instead of trading honorably with the indigenous, what some of these Calvinist abolitionists, alleged abolitionists, would do would trade alcohol for like fur skins or, game. And John Brown would always tell them, you know, this is not something that they have in their society. You know, it is creating a problem for them. Why would you do this to them? You are full of the devil. So I think one of these people says to Brown, you know, you let these indigenous come and hunt on your land. Why don't you run them off? And Brown's response to them is, first of all, this was their land first. This was their land. They are allowing us to be here. And second, that's just mean. But why are you being mean? That's just mean. I'm not going to do that. That is what John Brown said when one of his abolitionist friends, his Calvinist abolitionist brethren, said, you know, why don't you run these damn engines off your land? Brown was like, this ain't my land. And why are you such a dick? Jesus, why don't you do what he said? How about that? So reading about the way the Brown family lived out their faith, like for real, it just blew my mind. But the way that Brown expressed his Calvinism in the context of work was very interesting. And in reading DeCaro's book, I realized why there has been such an effort made by historians and academics to dismiss John Brown as not only crazy for wanting to do everything he could to end slavery, but to disparage his experience as an entrepreneur. Because there's this whole narrative about John Brown that not only was he insane, but he was so crazy, focusing so much on freeing the Negroes that he couldn't even run his own business. That really is the narrative. So you have this weird capitalist insult because John Brown wasn't a successful entrepreneur, then he was a complete failure as a person, right? But the business that Brown was a partner in, it was called Perkins and Brown, and it was a wool trading business. It was only one of 3 such businesses in this country at that time. And so all of the people who had sheep, who were selling the sheep wool on the open market to the textile manufacturers, were being raked over the coals. They were being ripped off by the textile manufacturers. Brown goes into business with this guy, Perkins. They start this business, you know, Perkins and Brown, wool and sheep and wool traders, or whatever it's called, something like that. Brown realizes that the manufacturers are taking advantage of the workers of the sheep herders, and Brown tries to organize them because he sees that the manufacturers are organized against them. Brown, in his business representing the sheep herders, is trying to tell them what they need to do in order to come together, improve the way they present their product to the manufacturers, and collectively demand a better price and better treatment from the manufacturers. John Brown did this because of his Calvinist faith, because he believed in biblical justice and equality so much that not only did he do everything he could to live among marginalized and oppressed people, and he didn't see himself as their savior. He believed that because he believed that it was God's mandate to end this sin of slavery, that because he believed that he was divinely chosen by God to carry it out. Because that's just what he felt. He knew what was in the book, and because he knew, he felt like it was his job to do what God told him to do, which was to fight for justice on behalf of the oppressed. That is literally one of the scriptures in the Bible. So Brown would, whatever job he had, whatever entrepreneurial enterprise he engaged in, he always hired Black and indigenous workers. Always. And like I said, he went to church. He went to Black churches. Rarely did he go to Calvinist churches because they were white. Calvinist churches were segregated. John didn't want to go to a segregated church, so he went to the Black church. Right? So here he is, basically an organizer. He was a labor organizer. And whenever he encountered someone in a business sense who was taking advantage of a worker, he would always defend the worker. So a lot of times, the reason Brown wasn't successful in business was because he challenged the exploitation that the business owners or the rich imposed upon the workers or the poor. And the failure of Perkins and Brown was not solely due to John Brown because he was fucking crazy for wanting to end slavery, because that is what these white people continue to say about John Brown. No, Perkins and Brown failed because the workers would not organize. And I'm kind of trying to figure out how to talk about that part of his history, how his organizing efforts were not successful, not because he was crazy, because he had, I don't know what people were thinking, not because he was crazy, but because the workers did not want to organize and they wouldn't do what Brown said. And those workers, by the way, the shepherds and the textile, the shearers, that's the word I was looking for. The shearers, the people who cut the wool off the sheep, they didn't want to do what Brown said. So Perkins and Brown, one of only three companies in the country at that time, it was like 1846 or something or other like that. Those workers, that company went out of business because the workers that Brown were trying to organize so that they could collectively get better prices from the textile manufacturers refused to organize to do that. So this whole kind of I don't know what to I don't know this whole period of time in this country right now. It's really hard for me not to see how, yes, it's fascism, but it's always been fascism, right? It's always been fascist, but we are living in a type of theocracy, and I think we've been living in a theocracy for a long time, much longer than we think. I mean, if you look back to the Clinton administration, didn't he brand himself, as a good old boy Christian? Yeah, he did. Yes, he did. There was a whole lot of talk about his Christian faith. And what does he do with his Christian faith? Well, he reformed welfare. And just in case, for those of you who are not old enough to remember what Bill Clinton did, in 1996, he passed this legislation called the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. PRWORA. The very first words in this title are reflective of this twisted ideology, personal responsibility. All right. So this act, imposed time limits, a lifetime limit of 5 years, 60 months, for receiving federal cash assistance, but the legislation allowed the states to set shorter limits. It introduced work requirements. It required a significant percentage of recipients to be working or in a work-related activity like job training within 2 years of receiving aid. Most people who receive any type of welfare already work, and that has almost always been true. Right? Block grants to states instead of the federal government matching state spending like it did with AFDC. This act gave states fixed block grants, gave them a pot of money and said, this is all you're going to get. And this gave states much more flexibility in how they designed and ran their welfare programs, but it also capped federal funding. All right. So if states could not meet the need for assistance, they weren't getting any more money from the federal government. So people who didn't have assistance or enough assistance in their states, they just didn't get it, which now you should see why we have a homeless crisis the way we do. And one of the other legislative reasons that caused it, Bill Clinton's legislation. Under AFDC, anyone who met the eligibility criteria was legally entitled to benefits, but under this new program, there's no such entitlement. States can deny benefits even if a family qualifies. That was in Bill Clinton's legislation. It also included stricter enforcement of child support. So when our people got locked up for not paying child support, when they weren't really not paying child support, they might have been in between jobs, or they just weren't getting paid enough and they couldn't afford child support. They got locked up thanks to Bill Clinton, who remember that photo of him in front of, when he was introducing the crime bill, I believe it was, the picture, that he took in front of the platoons of Black inmates. Mm-hmm. He knew what he was doing. Yeah. So placed a stricter enforcement of child support and placed new restrictions on benefits for immigrants and legal permanent residents. So this idea of illegal immigrants getting federal and all of these people know that this is what happened in 1996. So them continuing to say illegal immigrants are getting federal, but they're fucking lying, and they know they're fucking lying. The only thing is, you don't know they're lying, because y'all said that Bill Clinton was the first Black president because he played saxophone on Arsenio Hall real bad that one time. And you love Toni Morrison, and she said he was the first Black president, and we love Toni Morrison too much to tell her she was out of her damn mind for that. That's the one thing. That's the one criticism. So, excuse me. This holy hatred of the poor, this thing of Christians in this country and in Western nations in general, hating the poor the way they do, you're not misunderstanding what you're seeing. You're not getting it wrong. These people really do hate poor people. They honestly do. And there is no reasoning with them, because they really do believe that their salvation relies on them not impeding somebody else who needs to be punished in order to make them act right so God can bless them, right? You're not going to reason with these people. You need to let they friends, if they have somebody who can go into their institutions and tell them they're full of shit. That's not our job. That's not my job. Not my job. This book I am writing, yes, it has those elements in it, but I'm not crazy. I know how those folks are going to respond to this book. I'm pretty sure they ain't gonna like it. They're gonna have some really nasty things to say, but see, the truth is what it is. And ultimately, Christians who have this issue, who have this belief, who don't even read their own fucking Bible, to know that they are the ones who are on the wrong side of God. They are the ones that the scriptures condemn. Their behavior is what the scriptures condemn. Ultimately, they're not angry at anybody who is telling them that they are wrong. They're angry with God. They're angry with the Bible because everything they say is literally a lie. All of it, all of this bullshit about, God rewards faith with wealth. Where say that at? It does not say that anywhere in the book. As a matter of fact, the book does say that Jesus himself, what does it say? Foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Jesus was homeless. But you got pastors out here talking about, God didn't call us to be poor. Jesus wasn't poor. Yes, he was. It literally says that in the book. And these are people who went to somebody's university, seminary, and allegedly studied the book. So that ought to let you know that these folks who are in these pulpits lying about what's in the Bible, they really are pulpit pimps, and they really are in it to make money. They truly are. And I know that as a Christian, this sounds really weird, right? It's like, oh my God, you're condemning your own people. Fuck yes, I am. Yes. Yes, because people lying about the faith in order to make money, in order to oppress, in order to dominate, in order to steal, in order to murder. People lying about the faith in order to enrich themselves is what got us in this mess, not the book itself. As weird and as contradictory as it is, because there is some weird shit in that book. It really is. There is some, and I read some of it, understanding that some of it is parable. Some of those things are not meant to be taken literally, like not mixing the two different types of fabrics. Why is anybody taking that seriously? But some people still do, but I wouldn't. The whole thing about, oh, God said you're not supposed to be eating shrimp. That's a specific group of people. And that is not even, it doesn't even apply to everybody. But why would you care when the same book says, don't call anything that God puts before you unclean just because you think you know everything? Basically, stay out of other people's mouths and mind your damn business. Is what it says. There are a lot of weird things in the Bible, and there are a lot of things in the Bible that have been misinterpreted, that have been absent translations, that have been totally lied about. Everything we think we know about what we think the Bible says about homosexuality is actually not about homosexuality. Those scriptures are about the rape of children or rape, non-consensual sex. It is about a power dynamic. It's about a power imbalance. That's what it is. Those scriptures about homosexuality, not at all. Not when you study the context, the historical context, and the history of the translations. But study is what we Christians don't do. We do not do it. And I don't know that it is something that is unique to Christians in this country, because like I said, look, I've been to other countries and I've seen Christians in other countries, and Christians in other countries are in the streets with a Molotov cocktail in one hand with a crucifix on, screaming for an end to capitalism, imperialism, and moving their country and their people towards socialism. I am serious. This is not, and this is, they are engaged in this struggle for equality, justice, and liberation for their people, partially because of their faith, because what they know to be unfair and unjust in their lives, they see the condemnation of that injustice in their faith texts, the very thing that they experience on an everyday basis. And I think this is what I've been kind of thinking about, trying to explain how people around the world incorporate their faith into their organizing and their revolutionary radical activity. And a lot of people around the world actually do, particularly in the global south. And they do it not because their faith tells them to. That's not actually, I don't think that's actually it. I think it is that people know that they are living in a society that is unfair. They know injustice when they feel it. They know that they work hard and they're not getting paid enough and they can't afford their rent and their food and their medicine. And faith, regardless of what the religion is, faith exists to help people make sense of a chaotic world and to give people some level of comfort when they can find none in the material world. Yes, for some people, it's probably a way to escape, but for some people, it is a way to escape hell on earth, right? So, and I know for a lot of people that doesn't make any sense, but I think that is true. I think all spiritual beliefs exist for the same reasons, to help people make sense of their existence in this vast and largely unknown world. We don't know. We still don't know why the planets move the way they do. We don't understand the universe. We don't understand our place in the universe. We still think we're the most important thing in the universe. And somehow spirituality reminds us that, number one, we're not. But number two, that's okay, because everything in the universe is equally important. We are important in the universe, but we're not the most important thing, right? Like, we're not at the top of nothing. And spirituality helps us make sense of that and be okay with it, and be able to make our way with some sense of confidence and surety, where otherwise some of us would just kind of be floating around freaked out about, oh my God, we're just floating around on this rock and I don't know where we are in the, that's, yeah. So, but I also think that most spiritual beliefs exist, or they emerged from communities of people who were dealing with some level of oppression, and they needed a release or an escape from that oppression, or a way to make sense of their life in the midst of that oppression. And in a weird way, adhering to some type of spirituality gives people a type of power that maybe they feel like they wouldn't have had otherwise, to continue on in the face of that oppression. I know for some people that doesn't make sense. I know for some people that is like, oh my God, how can people be so weak? I'm just telling you what I think. I think spirituality, I think that is the place it has in every society, I think, regardless of what the spiritual belief is. And I think those are positive, good things. The problem is always with who uses the spirituality for what purpose, right? If I am relying on my faith to give me a level of courage that I know I wouldn't have, to say the things I say and to go the places I go and to do the things that I do, then that's for me. I'm not inviting you to participate in any of it unless you want to watch, right? But you don't have to believe the same thing I do. This is what I need for myself, right? And I think that's a good thing. But the problem is always when people want to impose their personal belief or use for whatever it is onto other people. And people want to make what they believe spiritually something that everybody else has to believe. And somehow the problem is always when people use their personal belief in whatever to make rules for other people, so that everybody else's life can reflect whatever it is you believe. That is always the problem with any religion, any belief, any spirituality. And as we've seen in this country, and I think in the West, it just so happens that it's Christianity that was co-opted in the way that we just talked about. But certainly we've seen Islam treated the same way in other contexts, right? So so it is always the manipulation of whatever the thing is by the people whose purpose is to benefit personally from the manipulation of that thing. That is what most of these prosperity gospel preachers, and I'm not just talking about the white ones either. I really am talking about a lot of these Negroes. The what's his name? Marvin Winans. And what's the other one? Who told the ushers to shut the doors. Shut the doors during offering until they collected that, what was it, $42,000 he needed to pay those people that he held that which one, y'all remember which one it was, but I can't remember which one. But yeah, he had a conference. People came to the conference. They're having, I guess, one of the big worship ceremonies. He needs to pay the people at the conference site. So he holds a special offering and he tells the ushers, close the doors. And I guess they're just kind of standing around looking at him like, do what? Because that's not thank you, Marvin Sapp. Thank you, C. Thank you. And hey, it's good to see you. And give Mama a hug for me too. Yeah, I'm sure the ushers were like, do what? Because we don't do that. We don't do that in church. The ushers are usually not closing the doors just because it's offered. It doesn't. I mean, the doors are probably usually closed when service begins, right? The doors are usually open because I used to be a member of First Black Baptist Church of Glenarden over here in Glenarden, Maryland. It is a mega church. It is enormous. It's a 5,000 seat sanctuary that is packed full. I think they have 2 services on Sundays. So the doors are usually open while people are coming into church. And then when the service begins, that's when the ushers close the doors, right? So I'm just imagining when Marvin Sapp tells the ushers, close the doors, because he's giving his little speech about why people need to give, how to be manipulating the fuck out of people. They know the people sitting in these pews are poor. They know. This is the thing that pisses me off, particularly about these black motherfuckers. Excuse me. They know that the people in their pews are poor. They know they're struggling financially, and they will stand in front of them anyway and say the kind of shit that Marvin Sapp and these other bastards say. Well, you have to sow a seed. If you really want the Lord to bless you, you have to sow a seed in faith. You have to believe that God, you have to give sacrificially. This is what they tell people who they know can barely pay their fucking mortgage or rent. Right? And these are the same churches and the same pulpit pimp motherfuckers who have boards of trustees and deacons who decide, well, yeah, we've paid off our mortgage and we have 6-7 figures in 13 bank accounts. And the pastor is driving a Bentley and the first lady is driving a Maserati, right? But if one of our congregants comes and asks for help with their light bill, we have to make them fill out an application. We have to make them sign a bunch of forms. We have to make them promise. We have to have them sign a contract promising that they will pay this money back to the church that has millions. I am telling you what I have seen. I've seen these people do this. I went to a church one time where a brother was the choir director, and he lost his job in one of the shutdowns. This was several years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And he He was doing okay for a while, but the shutdown went on a long time, and he had to pay his light bill, and he didn't have enough money to pay his light bill. He asked the church. He asked the pastor. Pastor told him talk to the deacons. Talk to the deacons. Deacon told him, "Well, if you're not working, how you gonna pay the money back?" And I was like, "He said what? He said what?" I was ready to fight the deacon in the church, because this brother was my good friend, and he really was struggling, but he was trying so hard not to ask for help because of this whole shame thing that we have going on in the church around being poor. This is what we talked about in the first hour. This is where this shit comes from. Us being embarrassed that we're poor. We don't want to admit that we fucking broke. Because we don't want to be shamed. We don't want to be seen as lazy, because white folks call us lazy enough. we don't want to give them another reason to call us. Man, fuck them people. I wish, you know what, I can't say that. That's gonna get us. We already demonetized. Let me stop. I can't say. But the kind of things I wish. The kind of things that I'm seeing people do in other countries right now as resistance, I wish such things would happen at the sites of the Lakewood churches and all of these other mega churches, and what's a Perfecting Church in Detroit, what Winans Church, I would Creflo Dollar. I wish people would give us the bank account information and pay our damn bills. You done built a multi-billion-dollar cathedral that God does not need and he didn't ask for. And you are going to make the people whose tithes paid for that shit. And you're going to turn around and tell those people, after you extorted them, hung those people upside down by their feet and shook the money out their empty ass pockets. Then when they come to you for help, you're going to tell them, you got to pay it back? Pay it back? You owe them. These mega churches that have paid their mortgages off, you know what they need to be doing? They need to be paying their congregants a portion of what they collect into. Actually, they need to just eliminate tithes altogether. You just come to church. You ain't got to pay. You ain't got to do no tithing. Nope. Because if you read those scriptures about tithes, you would understand that that's not really a biblical mandate at all. The example is the way the early communities of followers of Christ conducted themselves, how they built community. That is the example for how church is supposed to operate, not through tithes and offerings. The early churches in the book of Acts, and they weren't even called churches then. They were just people who followed what it was called the way, right? After Jesus Christ had been crucified and allegedly resurrected, depending on whether you believe it or not. But people believed in this guy, Jesus, and the things that he taught for centuries after he was gone and resurrected and gone again. Again, if you believe it. So what did they do? How did they build buildings that they called churches? No, they did not. What they did was these communities of people kind of found each other, and they took all of their property, put it all in one pot, or they went and sold everything that they had. They went and sold everything that they had, and they brought the proceeds back, put it all into one pot, and the proceeds were distributed equally among everybody in the community of believers in the way. That is the example of how community of believers is supposed to operate. This, excuse me, tithing and, yes, that is in the Bible, but it's in the Old Testament. That's a whole nother conversation. But see, the other reason I am a socialist is because God is apparently a fucking socialist. Because ain't that socialism? What is that? If everybody brings their materials that they've sold everything and everybody has brought their money, the value of everything they owned that they sold, and they brought all that money, everybody put it in one pot, and then they counted how many people there were, and they said, okay, let's distribute all of this equally among this number of people. But then some people were like, well, no, I don't need that much. But my friend here, she's a widow, and she doesn't have anybody to remember, because remember, this is an ancient society. So women and widows and children, they were basically ass out if there was nobody to take care of them, if there was no man to take care of them. So let's say these people sold all their stuff, everybody got their money together, put it all in one pot. They're like, all right, 15 people here, let's distribute this equally among 15 people. One of the people says, wait, no, I don't need the whole portion for me, but Miss Stacy is a widow. She doesn't have a husband. Her husband is dead. So she needs some more help. Give her some of my portion. Or somebody said, I'm going to give you some of my portion because you have a child to take care of and your husband is sick. Right? So the early communities of believers in Jesus Christ put everything they had in a collective pot and redistributed those resources equally, and then they took care of the needs of the people who needed a little extra help. That is what church is supposed to be. That is the way that church collections, if you will, are supposed to be handled. But capitalism says, I can't buy a Maserati if you're doing that. I can't. Because if I have a church with 10,000 members, right? So these people had to find a way to turn preaching into a profession, basically. Oh, I just thought of that. Dang, I gotta do something with that. That's gotta get in the book somehow. So yeah, so I'm happy that I was able to share a little piece of my forthcoming book with you all. This has been quite a process. It's been very it's been kind of stressful. It's been very illuminating for me because it has taught me a level of discipline that I didn't have before, that I didn't know that I had. But when you have a deadline to write 14,500 words and a check depends on it, you're gonna write and you're gonna make sure. So yeah. So that's the show for today, y'all. Like I said, I wanted a lot. I really wanted to end this month with a discussion about Sudan, but I just wasn't able to because everybody is so busy. But I'm hoping to have, if not Abayome Azikiwe on to talk about it next week, then another comrade. So we will talk about Sudan next week if I'm gonna be around. I think I might be out of town. I don't even know anymore. But anyway, let me see what you all have to say, because I am also working on not reading the chat while I'm doing the show, because that can be a little distracting. So I would just want to say hey to everybody. Thank you so much for hopping on. Red Sea, Sweary Fairy, Stabilized, James C, Stoner Loner, Goddess, what's going on? Poncho McFarland, Beth Moore. Hey. Oh, it is not. Thank you for that. It's not. If y'all don't stop saying that shit, stop saying it. That has no basis in anything that is actually in the book. God is not waiting for you to help yourself for him to get. That's okay. Yeah. It's just so much. James, let's see, Paul Smith, hey, how are you doing? Dejuma Boutique, how are you? It's good to see you. Mr. Gerardo, thou shalt not steal. EBT is stealing from others who work to fund those who don't. I hope that was I hope that was I see it wasn't funny. Oh, this was all BS coming out of my mouth. This is why I don't read the comments when I do a show. Because of shit like this, because of stupidity, because of hatefulness, because of just the nasty. But this is Christian. This is white. This is Christians for you in the United States. This will not piss on you if you are on fire. This person, Mr. Gerardo, will not piss on you if you are on fire. Will do it in the name of the Lord. Will be like, well, I guess God wanted him to burn to death. But then when something goes wrong in their life, they're gonna wonder why don't nobody want to fuck with them. When shit goes south for them, then it's like, how can people be so cruel? No, you're a bastard. And people are celebrating you getting yours because of all that bullshit you talked when everybody else was suffering and you didn't have any compassion or mercy for anybody else, which if we are Christians, we're supposed to have. We're supposed to have that in abundance over and above anything else. Over and above anything else, we're supposed to have compassion and mercy for our fellow man. Also, literally in the book. Also in the book. Right? So, excuse me. Thank y'all so much for hanging out with me. Hey, Rao and Black Brew and Leah, Dre. Hey, what's going on, Dre? Thank y'all so much. Pickles 123, Vesper X. Yes, it is. Unconditional love is the way. And despite, how much I cuss and my bravado, that really is all I want. All I want is for us to find a way to love each other enough that we will fight for each other. And we will fight for each other to have the absolute best life that we can have in this life on earth right now. That's why I do what I do. So thanks so much. Appreciate you. I'll check y'all out next week, I think, if I'm going to be in town. But if I'm not, I'll let you know. Peace, everybody.